because, as I said, I had this power outage in my neighborhood, and so the PowerPoint was open and it didn't save. So that's why it looks a little different. I think the only difference is I had listed the criticisms against Sartre, which we went over at the end of class last time. Excuse me. We talked about the criticisms. Geez, let me get a sip of water here. We talked about the criticisms coming from the communists and from the Catholics. So the communists want to say that Sartre's existentialist philosophy, it leads to inaction. It leads to a sense of what he calls quietism. You don't want to do anything or get too involved because there are no clear right answers. The communists base their political philosophy typically on Marxist ideology, Marxist philosophy, which they read or they interpret as having very clear answers to what the right thing to do is. The revolution is the right thing to do. The rise of the working class, overthrow capitalism. This is, and it's not a maybe, it's a guarantee. And for Sartre, there's no guarantees. We'll talk about this when we get to despair. That's pretty much what he's talking about when he mentions despair, is this sort of idea that there's no guarantee in my actions and things might not go according to plan. But the communists are going to say that, because there's this sort of absolute abstract freedom. Your choices don't really have any sort of concreteness to them. And so it's sort of a bourgeois, bougie, I guess you could say, kind of indulgent, self-indulgent, intellectual philosophy, only suitable for upper-class Europeans like Sartre. The Catholics, we talked about them also, that's the other critics, they attack him from kind of another angle, that they both don't like the fact that he's not offering a clear dogma. Here's the right program. The Catholics and the communists don't like that. But obviously the Catholics don't like his atheism, the fact that he doesn't have this notion of a law-giving, ethical-giving God that we all have sort of, we're all beholden to in a very similar sense. This leads to basically a life where the world is empty and full of meaning, and it's a dark, pessimistic view. This is sort of the Catholic criticism. It looks like I'm getting some questions here in the chat box, so hold on a second. That was all recap, by the way, but now we're going to move on and get to sort of like new stuff. But I'm getting more questions about the essay. Somebody asked, what essay were you talking about? I don't think I was clear when I was talking about the essay earlier. The final essay is not necessarily Sartre. You can write on Sartre if you want, but the final essay, you'll see when I post the topic, I'm still kind of working on the wording of it and all, but it'll be more broad. It'll involve Sartre, maybe just Sartre, but possibly other philosophers we've covered. And next week, we're going to do a little bit of Nietzsche, so you might even involve Nietzsche in your final essay. So the final essay will be more like a comprehensive, it might involve one or two philosophers, but you'll be looking at like a general question and basically explaining how different philosophers might approach that general question. Like, for instance, this probably won't be one of the questions, but I'll just, for example, what is the good life? Actually, that might be a question. That's not a bad idea. What is the good life? Pick one of the philosophers and decide, and pick two of them and decide how they would answer that question. And that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in the final essay, but it'll be due towards the end of the week, next week. And so, but today we're going to get through the majority of Sartre. Thursday, we're going to finish Sartre and probably have a little bit of time to get a head start on Nietzsche. And then, the following week, we're just going to do Nietzsche all week. And in fact, now that I think about it, I might just go ahead and push the due date back to Sunday. But, the sooner you can have your final essay in, the better. Because I think I have to have grades in before the Thanksgiving break. So I don't know how I'm going to grade this 2 classes. And I guess I'll just get no sleep on Sunday night and turn, just keep grading till the last minute. I really don't want to do that. I'll have clearer sort of, I need to go and look and see when the actual grades are due, when I have to submit them. And I might be misspeaking here. I might be mistaken about how much time I have, but I'm pretty sure I have to have everything in before Thanksgiving. I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to go. So I'm thinking that the final essay will be due at the end of the week next week, and that's no big deal. I'm just kind of concerned because I want to cover a little bit of Nietzsche, but I'm not even sure if that's even what's the point if we're only gonna have 1 or 2 days to do it. But we're gonna go ahead and trudge ahead, I guess. We'll see what happens, but I guess I'll have some more official news next meeting. But for now, that's sort of how we're gonna act. Finish Sartre this week, start Nietzsche next week, and that's our final week next week. And then after that, we have our, Monday. We don't meet at all, right? It's finals week, I guess. Short little week. All right, anybody else have any other questions? I'm going to jump back to Sartre. Otherwise, no. All right, cool. So, last meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong, we did cover this first quote. This is kind of Sartre's definition of existentialism. The belief that existence precedes essence, and he's talking particularly about just human existence, not everything that exists. This bottle of water does not have an existence that precedes its essence. Sartre explains that. We did cover this, correct? Could someone help me out? Maybe explain, what does this mean, like in layman's terms? What does it mean to say that existence precedes essence? What is he basically affirming here? Does anybody remember? Or did we get this far, or no? I know we didn't get to anguish, forlornness, and despair, but I wasn't quite sure if we got to this existence precedes essence.
I remembered that existence precedes essence in your water bottle analogy, but I forgot the explanation you gave for it.
Well, so he would say that the opposite is true of this water bottle, right? That before it existed, there was a concept for it. Somebody thought of, well, we need to, I'm going to make money. I'm going to bottle water. There's this spring in Texas. We'll call it Ozarka. We'll market it. So there were people that designed the label and people that designed the way it was shaped. And it was they knew what they were doing when they did it. They had a clear purpose in mind. And once it was made, it just sits here and fulfills its purpose. Whenever I'm thirsty, until it's empty, and I throw it in the recycling bin. That's all it does, okay? That's not us, though, Sartre says. He says, we're not like this bottle of water. We exist before we have a purpose or a meaning. If it were the case that we were like this, though, there'd have to always involve something else. Something else would have to be involved. What do you think? So if I'm like this bottle of water, or this phone, right, or the mouse that I'm using on my laptop, or the book that I'm reading, right? If I'm like that, if before I ever existed, there was a plan like this, just like the way there was a plan for this book, what would that involve, according to Sartre? What would that necessarily involve? He doesn't think it's true. He thinks that we do exist before we don't. But if we were like a book, or we were like a bottle, then we again, and what makes them different from us is that before they ever existed, they were already defined. They were already understood. There was already a concept. There was a plan. And once they were created, there was a specific use. So if we were, and maybe we are like that, right? But what would that involve? He doesn't think we are, but what would that necessarily involve?
God.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, he's thinking there'd have to be some deity who thought of us, right? Who had us in their mind and created us with this particular purpose in mind. Just like the manufacturer makes the bottle of water, they want to make a profit, and it's all these other sort of goals they have, and that's why they just do what they do. And yeah, like you said, Sartre's going to say, yeah, there'd have to be some deity, and he's atheistic, so he thinks, well, obviously because there's no God, and he even kind of backtracks on this. I honestly, I'm not religious myself, so it doesn't really bother me that he's an atheist, but I think he makes it seem more of an issue than it really is. It's not till the end of the essay that he kind of backtracks, because he even says, I think towards the end, something to the effect that even if there is such a deity, we are forlorn. That's the second term here. Regardless, because we still don't have direct access to that deity. If we do have a purpose, it's not clear what that purpose is. We're always in this state of not knowing, and that's the part of our condition. So our existence precedes our essence. We exist before we can be defined by a concept. And we have this absolute freedom, as he wants to assert. We have this absolute freedom, complete freedom, to define ourselves, see ourselves however we see fit. It's not some set in stone thing. Just like this ball of water has no freedom to be a phone. It's just, but we see ourselves, we have a self-conception of ourselves, and we are absolutely responsible for this. I'm looking for the quote here. I think I read this last time, but maybe it'll be a good refresher since it's been a while since we met. I know we had to miss last meeting because I keep having trouble with my computer. And oh yeah, that reminds me. By the way, if it cuts off, what are the odds? But I've had 2 blackouts in this neighborhood in less than a week. I guess that's what happens when you live in the hood. I don't know, but yeah. I mean, if this meeting cuts out, that's probably what happened. My computer should be fine. I got that fixed finally. I hope it's been working fine so far. So if the meeting cuts out just unexpectedly, that's probably what it is. I despair. We'll get to that in a minute, right? There's no guarantee what's going to happen, right? This is like despair. Perfect example of what Sartre's talking about when he talks about despair. But let me find real quick. Again, I think I read this quote last time. This is on page 22, and this is where he sort of, I guess you might say, summarizes what he means here by existence preceding essence. It's about halfway down the page. So again, page 22. What do we mean here by existence precedes essence? We mean that man first exists. He materializes in the world, encounters himself, and only afterward defines himself. If man, as existentialists conceive of him, cannot be defined, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus, there is no human nature, since there is no God to conceive of it. Man is not only that which he conceives himself to be, but that which he wills himself to be. And since he conceives of himself only after he exists, just as he wills himself to be after being thrown into existence, man is nothing other than what he makes of himself. Okay. So for Sartre, because of this, right, because we are the only beings for whom our existence precedes our essence, because we are the ones who have this absolute freedom to define ourselves, it's an absolutely liberating thing, and it gives us a certain dignity. So it gives us a wide range of possibilities. Nothing really limits my freedom except for really, what is it? Other people's freedom. They can get in the way of my freedom. They can oppress me. They do all sorts of things to get in the way of my freedom. They can affect me psychologically and my sense of self-worth. Just brute facts. I can't fly if I want to. I can't just walk through walls and things like this. Just brute facticity. I can't change. But besides this, I'm absolutely free. So there's a liberating truth, he wants to say, in this pronouncement that existence precedes essence. On the other hand, it makes us absolutely responsible for what we make of ourselves. We are nothing to begin with. We didn't decide to exist, but once we're here, we are what we make of ourselves, he says, and that makes us absolutely responsible. And this responsibility, I think this is exactly where we ended last class. We were talking about this notion of responsibility and how when he says I'm responsible, it's not just for myself, but it's for all mankind, all people, right? And that seems very counterintuitive, and I think poorly worded. I think that he's not expressing himself very well here, and it's misleading the way that this is worded. When he says that I'm responsible for all mankind, he's not saying that I'm responsible for other people's actions, but it's more like he's saying that, I think we talked about this term last time. This is technical jargon, but he says we are not just a thing, we are a for itself. And so in a sense, the world is for me. The world appears to me in a certain way. I interpret it. I understand the in itself, the objects, as in a certain way because I'm engaged in a certain project. And so in a sense, the world is for me, but it's also for other freedoms. They also have an interpretation of the world. They also see the world a certain way. And so I think this is why he says it this way. I think this is why he says that I'm responsible for others. Maybe it'd be more, I think it'd be better to the English speaker to say before the other, right? I'm responsible before the other. It's like not only do I act, but I act in a world where I affect other people. And so I'm, you know, when I interpret my world this way, when I have a certain identity and I identify myself in a certain way, and I live my life and my actions are informed by certain values, other people will see it and they will judge it, and they might judge it harshly or they might praise it. And so that's something I have to take stock of. And because of this responsibility, Sartre is going to argue this deep responsibility, not just for me, but for all mankind, as he puts it. This is why I feel emotions like anguish, forlornness, or despair. And forlornment, why did I put, I guess I'm confused here. Let me correct this. Forlornness is the term that I'm used to is forlornness. But in your translation, this book, which is the more popular translation now, the term is abandonment. But I will be confused, and I will probably keep saying forlornness for at least another 2 or 3 semesters until I get this down. So please forgive me and bear with me. And the more I think about it, I think I prefer the word forlornness to abandonment, because I think abandonment has different connotations that forlornness doesn't. But anyways, I digress. Let's get back to the responsibility, and then we'll talk about each of these individually. And by the time we're done with that, I think probably we'll see how we're doing for time, but we might have that's all we might have time for actually today, and then not tomorrow, Thursday next meeting we'll go over some other objections, criticisms of Sartre that he has to respond to towards the end of the essay. So very quickly, let's just go through all 3 of these, and then I'll expand on them one by one. Anguish for him is this feeling of responsibility. It's this realization that when I do something and I act, especially when my choice involves other human beings, anguish is that feeling I get. You know, that feeling of caution, responsibility, thinking about what they're going to think, thinking about their approval or disapproval. Or even if I don't care about their approval or disapproval, maybe their well-being or their lack of well-being or my concern. This is the anguish that I feel. And again, this is this feeling of total and deep responsibility, not just for myself, but for all mankind, for all human beings, and all free beings. Forlornness, you know, the way he defines it is, I think, misleading. He says, oh, it's the realization that there is no God and we have to accept the consequences of this. That's, I think, kind of him just being provocative with his, atheism. But a good way to think of forlornness, really, and we'll talk about why he defines that way when we get to it and I expand on it. But what he really, the basic meaning is that you're alone, basically. You're cast aside, abandoned, right? You're on your own when you make your choice. When you make your choice, when you decide this is how I'm going to live my life, this is how I'm going to comport myself, these are the friends I'm going to have, these are the things I'm going to value, this is the career I'm going to pursue if I'm going to pursue a career at all. When you decide how you're going to do all these things, you're the one deciding, and it's up to you. As Sartre puts it, you're condemned to be free. So this is what he means by forlornness. You're on your own, right? You choose. You have to choose for yourself. It's your existence. You have to do it. Even when you decide, when you ask somebody else, or you have somebody else choose for you, you allow them to choose for you, I guess is Sartre's sort of argument. Despair, and I think I already kind of mentioned it, maybe kind of gave it away earlier, is this sort of realization that anything can go wrong. You know, when you do make your choice, when you make a commitment and you decide to act a certain way, there's always a possibility it's not going to go according to plan, and you might regret it, and you might change your mind, and you need to accept this, that you never know until you do it, and you might again have regrets. And so this realization that that's the case, that anything could go wrong. Like right now, this whole meeting could just end all of a sudden because my freaking power goes out again for 3 or 4 hours. I sure hope not, right? Maybe I should not mention that again. Maybe if I keep saying it, it'll jinx us or something like that. Now I'm getting all superstitious. But anyway, so that's simply put, that's what those are. Anguish is this feeling of responsibility. Forlornness is the my ownness of my choices. I'm alone. I'm abandoned to my choices. And despair is the kind of the realization that things, might not always go according to plan. So I have to make a choice that I can live with, regardless of how it goes. It might not work out, but can I justify it? Looking back, like, yeah, it didn't work out, but man, given what I thought at the time, I'm glad I did it still, right? I still would have taken the chance or something like this, right? Okay, now I feel really comfortable. I can relax because I've kind of said all the essential stuff. We can sit back and expand a little bit on these three. So he gives us some examples of situations in which these come into play. And I'm only going to pick out a few of them. There's quite a few more in the reading. I wish he would have done what I'm about to do and sort of maybe expanded on a few examples instead of giving us a bunch of just very kind of just abstract examples. I'm going to pick what I think to be his best examples. He talks about, in the case of Anguish, for instance, he talks about the military commander who feels anguish when he's given orders from on high, right? His superior officers or, commander or whatever, tell him, hey, you've got to go attack this army of the enemy, or you've got to go try to capture their base, whatever the order he gets. And now he has to decide how he's going to execute these orders. And Sartre's going to say he can't help but feel anguish. He can't help but feel that total and deep responsibility that he has towards his troops that he's ordering. If he doesn't think about it carefully and consider all the contingencies, anything that could possibly go wrong, if he doesn't really take this choice seriously, that his I wouldn't say incompetence, but maybe his negligence is a better word, that could completely affect whether or not some of his men die, whether they get killed in battle, or how many of them die. So he's going to feel this anguish. Now, this is where the critics will chime in. Some of Sartre's critics, like the communist critics who say that existentialism leads to a sort of quietism, they're going to chime in right now and they're going to say, well, hey, that's going to make you not want to do anything. It's too overwhelming. You're going to be like, whoa, I've got to decide, these people might die. There's no right answer. Like, there's no good one. Like, I have to pick, and like, they all have pros and cons, and like, there's no way to know how they're going to work. Just you be the commander, right? That's what the communist is going to say. No one's going to want to do anything because this is just too much weight on our shoulders. But Sartre actually says that's quite the opposite. He argues that this anguish is actually the condition for our choice. It's the only reason we're able to choose, because otherwise the choices wouldn't have any value. They only have value. They only have exigency. He likes to use that word exigency a lot, right? They jump out at us as choices that need to be done. They only have real weight because we feel this anguish. If we didn't feel the anguish, then it would lead to quietism. But the fact that we know that this is something, imagine the commander who really does care and respect and love his men. They're good fighters, they're disciplined. I worked with them and I care about their lives, and I don't want to risk their lives unnecessarily. I mean, that's going to make the choice have value and real weight, as Sartre puts it. So that's the anguish. Now, forlornness, again, he says that this is yeah, again, the way he introduces it, I don't really like this particularly too much. I kind of know why he does this, so I'll explain in a second. But I think it's misleading. So he says, oh, forlornness is a realization that there is no God, or that God doesn't exist, and you have to face the consequences of this. And, you know, really simply what he's talking about when he talks about forlornness is the fact that my choices are my own and I have to make them. They're, you know, they're mine. I'm on my own. Even if I go looking for advice and I try to just follow someone else's advice, I decided, I chose, he's going to say, to follow that advice. So this forlornness is this being on your own. And I think that a good example is the example of the student who comes to visit him. And we'll talk about that in a little bit also. But why does he mention this non-existence of God here? Why does he bring in the atheism? I think, my reading is he's trying to distinguish himself from other, I guess, secular philosophers. Let me get a new slide going here. So when we're talking about forlornness, and he says that, it's the realization that God, it doesn't exist, and we have to face the consequences of this. He's distinguishing his approach to ethics from people like Kant or Mill. Okay, if you look at J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, and Kant, who are very different philosophers as far as their ethics especially are concerned. They were both, at least they claimed to be religious men. They claimed to be Christian. They were European. Mill was from the 1800s, and Kant's 1700s, late 1700s, died in 1804, I think. They were both, devout Christians by their own account, and I'll give them that. Sure, I don't. What's the point of denying someone their profession of personal faith? Okay, but however, they thought that one could produce a secular ethics that wasn't based on religion. So you had to be able to just use pure reason, pure, rationality, good argumentation, a priori reasoning, to use sort of the Kantian way of going about it, to establish ethics. You don't need God. You don't need a higher power to have a universal ethics. You don't need, so Kant says, you have to assume it. It's sort of his, some say it's kind of a cop-out. Like, you can't prove it. You have to assume it. J.S. Mill says, well, no. For Mill, happiness is the basis for ethics. You want as much happiness as possible. And he sort of says, well, that's not based on God, but it's not against God either. Doesn't God want us to be happy is kind of his take of it, right? So again, they say, even if you separate religion from secular morality, you can have a secular morality, a non-religious, non-spiritual morality that is universal, a priori, has universal truth, has an answer for everybody, prescription, 10 commandments or something like this. And Sartre is saying no. If there is no God, if there is no universal deity who designed us for a certain specific purpose in mind, then there's no basis. There's no rational basis for ethics. I mean, there might be a rational basis for ethics. I don't want to mischaracterize Sartre, but it's not necessarily uniform. I might use reason and come to a different conclusion than you do. It's not necessarily, it's the way he quotes Dostoevsky, this character from Dostoevsky, saying, if God doesn't exist, then anything is permissible, right? And again, why I don't like the fact that he makes such a big deal about the atheism is because I think it obscures the ultimate point he's trying to make about forlornness, which is really that even if there is a God, and he kind of says this, like some of the last few things he says at the end of the lecture, or something, well, even if there isn't a God, all what I say, even if there is a God, he says, we don't care, we're not trying to prove or disprove it, that's not what the existentialist is concerned with. Even if there were a deity, he wants to say we're still forlorn, because let's say there is a deity, there is a God who created us. We don't have his email address. We don't have his phone number. We can't, and you know, even if we heard a voice in our mind, how do we know that's God or not just us going nuts? Or how do we know it's not the devil trying to trick us? Or how do we know it's not, I mean, these are things that we have to decide ultimately. Is that God talking to me? Is that just my intuition? Is that just my conscience? Like, so ultimately we are forlorn, whether or not, you know, in this life, in this existence that we have, we're on our own, I guess you could say. We're condemned to be free, as Sartre puts it. In fact, so I mentioned this example of the student who goes to ask him for advice, and I think this is probably his best example of forlornness to me. I mean, you might disagree, I don't know, but for me, you know, the student comes to talk to him, I guess after class, and who got this far in the reading? Let's see who's paying attention. Who remembers this? There's a student looking for advice. Let's see what page we're on here. It's around page 30. What is it? 29, 30, 31. Student comes talking to him for advice. What do I do, Sartre? I have no idea. I've got this difficult decision to make. Do I need to open chat box? Y'all just being shy? No one's doing the reading still? No.
I don't recall that bit.
So the kid's like asking if he should go to war. He's like, should I go fight in the war? Or what's the other option? You don't remember this kid? His brothers, his dad left, and his brothers went to go fight and died. So he's the only one left. It's just him and mom. And he wants to go fight. He wants to go protect France, the homeland, you know. Vive la France. But he loves his mom. And he's like, well, I want to go fight. I want to, you know, fight for my country, just like my brothers did. But what if I go and I die? My mom will be left all alone. Yeah. So what do I do, Sartre? Should I go fight? Or should I stay with my mom? What do you think Sartre tells him? Just given what I've said so far, even if you didn't do the reading, what do you think Sartre's going to say to this kid? What's the correct choice, Sartre? Go fight or stay with mom? Which is the right choice?
Stay with his mother.
That's not what Sartre tells him. That's what he does. He does do that. He says, yeah, I think I'm going to stay with mom. I think I'd rather stay with my mom, you know, because that's what I feel, right? That's what my gut is telling me. Yes, it's sort of, that's what he ends up doing. But Sartre doesn't give him any advice. Sartre says you have to choose, right? You're on your own, man. There's no right choice, right? I mean, for you there might be. There's a right choice for you, but I'm not you. Which one do you care about more? You care about your mom more? Or do you care about France, this nation, country? I mean, I'm sure you care about your country, but which one has more meaning for you? Obviously the mom, I suppose. And for Sartre, no one can help him make that choice ultimately. In fact, this is kind of a cynical thing that he says. I don't know if it's true, but I kind of tend to think it is kind of true. Maybe not every case, but he says something to the effect that when you go looking for advice, you pretty much already made up your mind. Most people already know what they want to do. And so they go looking for advice. Why do they look for advice? He says they even like pick who they ask based on what their choice is, right? I guess if they want to do something really naughty, they'll go talk to their naughty friend, you know? If they want to do something really good, they'll talk to the priest or their pastor. Excuse me. But why would they do that? Like, if you've already made up your mind, why would you go ask for advice, do you think? What would the point of that be?
To reconfirm.
Yeah, you're looking for some sort of outside confirmation, basically, is what he's going to argue. Is you have this desire to alleviate some of that responsibility from yourself. So that way, when maybe things don't work out, but if they don't work out, you can look back and say, well, even my friend said I should have done that. It's not my fault. Didn't work out. Universe is just against me. It's not my fault. But yeah, so Sartre's like, no, BS, man. You know, that's what you wanted to do. You're looking for excuses. And then this is what we do, he says. But, you're condemned to be free, as he puts it. Let me see. This is on page 29 where he says that. This is what I mean when I say man is condemned to be free. He's condemned because he did not create himself, but he's nonetheless free because once cast into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Existentialists do not believe in the power of passion. They will never regard a great passion as a devastating torrent that inevitably compels a man to commit certain acts and which is therefore an excuse. They think that man is responsible for his own passion. This is kind of a hardline view on responsibility, I would say. I remember, when I was first really getting deep into philosophy, how much I really loved Sartre. He was one of my favorites, and I like to read him. I think he's really fun to teach. But I find him almost like too hardline about this whole responsibility thing. In a way, when I first encountered him early on, I think this is what I liked about him, because I feel like, at least from my view, maybe it's just sort of my perspective and sort of the way I'm seeing things. We seem to live in a society full of like irresponsibility. People love to make excuses, and it's not my fault, and it's, blame someone else, blame this, blame that. And, sometimes there's definitely blame to go around. I don't want to say no one's not blameworthy, but so I thought it was refreshing, this whole like, you're responsible, you have to, but I mean, I don't know. There's a certain limit, it seems. I know there's a lot of psychology majors in here. What do you think that Sartre would think about modern psychiatry, psychology, mental health, the mental health, I don't know what to call it, discipline, the mental health discipline in general? What do you think Sartre would say about these things? You have any inkling? What would he say about things like ADHD and OCD and this disorder, that disorder?
Well, considering the time that he was in, I'm not sure if he would have. I feel like he would have a less than sympathetic approach when it comes to, especially when it comes to people with mental illnesses around that time. Right. And I'm just basing it off the time he was living in.
No, I think you'd be correct. I think he's, even still today, he might be pretty harsh. I don't know if he would have changed much. I think he probably would give a little bit of ground in extreme cases, where it's like, extreme schizophrenia or something like this, where, it's you're not even functional at all. I think he would probably allow for those. I hope he would, but I also still think he'd be pretty hard line about other things, like ADHD. I don't know. This is just my take on it. I think you're right. I think he would be pretty like, these are just excuses, I remember, and honestly, like, I'm kind of a skeptic myself, to put my sort of cards on the table. I'm not a big fan of psychiatry in mine, but that's from personal experience. I've got personal bias. I have friends that were not exactly helped by the mental health industry, I guess. So I have my own personal bias against that sort of thing. I realize this. So, but to be fair, I know there's people who've been helped by this. I haven't known any. Everybody that I've known's been, they ended up worse when they went to therapy or whatever, right? Everybody I've known ended up worse or dead, suicide, right? OD, whatever. I've never known anybody to help ever. Okay, I've heard of it though. I know it exists. So like I've seen like there's a famous singer who just died recently. My father actually knew the guy. They used to like party in the '60s together. He was this rock star, Rocky Erickson from Texas, and he was really mental. I mean, the guy was, he was fine until I think about like the late '60s, early '70s, and he had a mental collapse, and he was not functional. His mother was taking care of him, and she was kind of like me. She's like, I'm not taking him to therapy. They're not going to help him. They're just going to make him worse. She was a skeptic like me, and the brother was like, no, Rocky needs help. Like, he really does need something. And I think they got him on, his brother was able to get legal custody of him and was able to get him on, I forgot, Prozac or something. And all of a sudden he's fine. He's touring, doing concerts, doing interviews, and before he was just living in this apartment in Austin, would not leave. You had to go, his mom had to go check on him every day. And so I know, like, obviously, like, I think if Sartre saw people like Rocky Erickson, he'd have to be like, okay, that guy's not responsible for his passion. Like, maybe it's up to some point, his drug use, maybe he got himself to that point. But some people, you might say, didn't. It's not their fault, right? They were put in a situation where they were traumatized or whatever, and they have, actual chemical imbalance or something like this. So I think if he was confronted with that, I mean, it'd be pretty hard for him, I think, to argue you're responsible. But he doesn't want us to. I think he would really hate that song, "Blame It on the Alcohol." You don't blame it on the alcohol. No, you chose to get drunk, guys. It's your fault. I've got a comment here from Lenitria. Let's see what she says. He would probably blame them for their conditions. I think you're right. I think he'd tend to be a hardliner about this. And again, I used to kind of be with him on this. I used to sort of be like, yeah, people need to stop making excuses. But I do tend to think he takes it too far. I think he's just like, come on, man. Like, in some cases, there's some, yes, you are responsible for your passion, but up to a certain extent. Yeah, he said, what else did she say? He would probably believe that they had to do something to cause such a phenomenon. Yeah, I think he would probably say, you can trace it back to something. And in fact, I don't know a whole lot about his psychoanalysis, but apparently, he did in his later career try to develop an existentialist form of psychoanalysis. He was very critical of Freud. He didn't like Freudian psychoanalysis. He thought that the idea of a subconscious was that was another way of obfuscating responsibility. Oh, it's not your fault. You just have these repressed, but the way Sartre, I think the way he approached psychoanalysis was you try to understand the source of your condition. Why are you so pissed off, or why are you so unstable? And ultimately, it's the way you're interpreting things. It's your own narrative. And so you just go through these existentialist psychoanalytic sessions to uncover what that narrative is and become self-aware of it. This is sort of like that was his approach. Again, I don't know a whole lot about it, but there are still people today. I know up in Seattle, my mother lives in Seattle. I was there one summer and just stayed with her all summer, and I had a membership to the gym, the neighborhood gym, and I was on the treadmill and I was talking to this dude right next to me, and it turns out he's an existentialist psychoanalyst. He actually is a therapist and like does existential therapy. So it still exists. It's not as big as it was in the 60s and 70s, but it's still out there. But yeah, you're right, Lenitra, and I think it was Ita that was talking about, or Ita who was talking about, yeah, I think he'd be pretty critical, and probably too critical. I think he'd go further than I would, even though I'm pretty critical of it myself. But back to forlornness, he's going to say, again, this kid who comes to him with the choice, it's his choice, and there's really no way that he can come up with a choice that is certain and independent of his own. I mean, ultimately he stays with his mom. He doesn't go to fight, but that's probably because the mom has more meaning for him. As Sartre puts it, what's going to give him more fulfillment, the possibility of helping in the war, or the guarantee. Like, if he stays with his mom, he knows that that's going to help his mom. If he goes to fight in the war, he doesn't know. He might help, he might not. He might even get in the way if he's not that good of a fighter. So, but there's no one that can help him choose a priori, right? Independent of anything. He has to take his own convictions and all these concerns, into his decision making process. On 31, Sartre says that even Kant, Kantian ethics, Christian ethics, neither one of these can help him decide what the right path is. It's like, really? Like, there's no, like, Kant can't tell him what's right? That, you can't get a Christian theologian to tell him what the right thing to do is? But Sartre explains, no, even those don't give you a clear answer. This is on page 31. It's that first full paragraph. He said, who could help him make that choice? The Christian doctrine? No. The Christian doctrine tells us we must be charitable, love our neighbor, sacrifice ourselves for others, choose the narrow path, etc. But what is the narrow path? Whom should we love like a brother? The soldier or the mother? Which is the more useful aim, the vague one of fighting as part of a group, or the more concrete one of helping one particular person keep on living? Who can decide that a priori? No one. No code of ethics on record answers that question. Kantian, as getting to Kant, Kantian morality instructs us to never treat another as a means, but always as an end. Very well. If I stay with my mother, I'll treat her as an end, but not as a means. And if I go fight, then vice versa. Okay, so ultimately, even if I decide to go with the Christian doctrine, I still have to interpret what is the narrow path, what is the greater good. That I have to decide. So I'm ultimately on my own. I'm condemned to be free. Okay, I'm forlorn, as Sartre puts it. Well, what about despair? Again, this is the way I explain despair is it's the realization that things might not turn out the way you plan them. So when you engage in a project of any kind, this is my life's goal, it might not work out the way you envision it. In fact, it's guaranteed not to, unless you're psychic and you have like photographic vision of the future. But yeah, most of us don't. I would say all of us don't. And so nobody knows exactly how things are going to work out. I don't really like the way he defines it. It's funny because he says it's very clear. I guess it's not that I have a problem with the way he defines it. I think it's just funny that he says it's clear because it's not. This is on 34 at the bottom. He says, as for despair, it has a simple meaning. It's a very simple meaning. It means that we must limit ourselves to reckoning only with those things that depend on our will or on the set of probabilities that enable action. Okay, so basically, look, I don't have control over everything. All I have control over is what I decide to do with my own existence, and I have to be able to live with that choice no matter how the cookie crumbles, no matter how things sort of fall out. And then he gives this example of waiting for his friend at a train station. And to me, this is another example of Sartre using very dramatic language to describe something that's not necessarily very dramatic. So the word despair just sounds so over the top, despair. And waiting for your friend at the train station is not something that you would sort of assume despair unless there was something really serious. I don't know, like you heard some news story that some train was, let's say you're Sartre and you're waiting in Paris at the train station and you hear some news story on the radio that says there's been a train robbery for a train going to Paris. We don't know where it was coming from, but we know it's headed towards Paris and the robbers are there. They're shooting people and robbing, and then that might be despair in the way that we think of it, right? But it can be very subtle, even if there's nothing going wrong. Anytime I involve myself with anybody else and I'm expecting a result of any kind, where they have something to do with that result, there's always the possibility of failure. So when Sartre is waiting at the train station for his buddy, I'm assuming it's Pierre, because he's always waiting for Pierre in all of his novels, and not novels, all his examples and being in nothingness. So he's like, Pierre, where's Pierre? I'm at the cafe waiting for Pierre. Now he's at the train station waiting for Pierre. Why despair, though? What could possibly go wrong? His buddy Pierre says that he's going to be there at 7. Sartre is there to pick him up, help him find his way back to, his home. Why despair? What could possibly go wrong? For Sartre, there's an infinite amount of possibilities. When you think of one or two, why might not Pierre show up?
His car could have broke down.
Yeah, maybe he couldn't make it to the train station and he missed the train because his car broke down. Maybe the train was late. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Sartre wrote
He slipped.
Go ahead.
He could have slipped and fell and busted his ankle.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, he had an accident. Pierre had an accident or something like that. Maybe Pierre, he read an article about Sartre that he didn't like, and he decided not to be his friend anymore. Now he's standing Sartre up, right? Maybe the train shut down on the tracks, and they're repairing it, and Pierre's going to be late. Like, so many things, okay? So, again, no guarantee that things are going to work out the way you planned or you envisioned them. Now, here's another spot where the communists are going to chime in, and they're going to say, aha, you don't know how things are going to work out, so why even get started? Why even try? You know, we know that we're right. We have this Marxist ideology that they think proves they're right, that the future is in their hands. Even if they die for the right cause. They're on the right side of history. But you're saying you never know. There's a one of his books that Sartre wrote where one of the main characters becomes a revolutionary and his revolution fails. And at the end of the book, the authorities he's in a shootout. It's like Scarface, the end of Scarface, where like everybody's coming in to just shoot up the mansion. But this guy, he's doing it for freedom, for liberty, to help to set the people free. And the authorities come and they shoot him and he dies. But as he's dying, he's thinking like, I'm still glad I did it. Even though it didn't work, I never felt more alive than now. Even though I'm facing death and bullets are flying and I'm about to die, I've never been more alive because I have meaning, I have purpose, even though it failed, right? This sort of absurdity of it, Sartre, would say this is great. This is exactly what he wants us to do. Is to sort of own our decisions, to own them, and to own it when we fail and when we were wrong. Hey, I messed up, and I need to rethink these things. Maybe that's a lesson for our politicians. I don't know if they'll ever take that one, but just admit if like a certain law didn't work. I was wrong about this. Change your mind. It's okay to be wrong. I feel like sometimes though, in public discourse, whether it's political or not, there's this like phobia of admitting you're wrong, or phobia of admitting that you made a choice that didn't quite work out, and you're trying to sort of like reinterpret it as a success, reinterpret all your or again, maybe like the case of forlornness, you're looking for advice so you can just blame it on someone else. It's not my fault. It's what anybody else would have done. Even my friend said I should have done this thing. Even my friend said I should have taken that chance. Even this guy said it. So it's not my fault.
Oh, you mean like how a company will double down on a mistake because they don't want to admit that they're wrong?
I was thinking of politicians, but that's a great example too. Like, usually corporations, whenever, they get fined a lot of money, they'll take the fine, but they always settle out of court. And one of the stipulations of the settlement is that they don't have to admit wrongdoing, right? That's a great example. I think we live in a society full of this, it's sort of like politicians, like, I hate to bring it up because, again, I'm not on any side. I'm not left, right, whatever. I'm kind of like fed up with both political parties, to be honest with you. But I think like during one of the debates with, Bernie Sanders was calling out Joe Biden on his crime bill and saying, hey, man, you passed this crime bill in the 90s and you were a big proponent of it. And that was really bad. And you were in favor of this bankruptcy bill. And Joe Biden just denied it. He's like, oh, no, that's not true. And he was like, look, you changed your mind. It's okay to change your mind. But like, I was in the Senate. I saw you. There's video on YouTube of you defending it. He's like, no, there's not. No, there's not. It's like, just admit, like, yes, I did that. It was wrong. It had this effect that I didn't think it would have. In retrospect, I should have done it differently. Like, that's what I think he should have done. But to be fair, though, I think that if he would have done that, some people, I don't think rightly, I think wrongly, but I think some people would have said that's weak, or that's showing weakness, or see, he's not perfect. Why vote for a guy that makes mistakes? You want somebody who is always right, and so I think our politicians are like forced to pretend to be perfect, and and it kind of backfires on them, you know, in a way. But that's, you know, it's the same thing with corporations, I guess, or big, you know, big banks, whenever they, you know, get caught, you know, laundering drug money or whatever, they're like, oh, let's just pay a fine, but we don't go to jail, and we don't admit anything wrong happened. We're just going to give, you know, the Treasury however many billions of dollars, so we just, you know, keep it quiet. So yeah, obviously though, Sartre is probably thinking on a more individual level, but I see this phenomenon. It's like not just, maybe it is like on an individual level, maybe that's why it is on a societal level. Like if we all are doing this on our own sort of personal level and trying to sort of skirt responsibility, you know, maybe this is the explanation for these phenomena that we keep speaking of, right? Politicians not wanting to fess up and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, because at best, if we're talking about everyone's pretty much doing it, it's not really. At worst, at best, it's we're complacent when it happens on a larger scale, and at worst, we're endorsing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that word, complacency, because that reminds me of, this is, I think, a good point. Sartre kind of says this, that if you don't act on something, you might as, and in a way, this is kind of like hardcore, maybe too hardcore. Like, he really thinks you're responsible, because it's like, if you don't stop it, you might as well be doing it, kind of thing. You know, it's like, you can say that I'm against this oppression, or I'm against that person being mistreated. It's like, well, what the hell are you doing to help them? Just talking? You know, he's like, you might as well be the oppressor yourself. If you're not doing everything within your power to try to help them, you know, and you're just as bad as the person. And, you know, I don't know if I want to say you're just as bad, but you're definitely, I would say there's something to that. You know, I mean, if you're walking by somebody and they're being beaten to death, and you just walk right past them and you say, geez, I hope you get away. That's really horrible that you're getting beaten to death. I'm really against people beating other people to death. I'm completely opposed to that. But I hope you get away from that guy. I'm really rooting for you to survive. Good luck. Gotta get to work. It's like, what? Like, do you really care about that guy getting beaten to death? Do you really care? It doesn't sound like it. It seems like that's in a way that maybe that is kind of more messed up, or just as messed up, or whatever. So yeah, like that's sort of his, you know, complacency is culpability in a certain sense. If we're complacent and we let it stand, we're a part of the problem, I suppose, right? What is that saying? If you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I think that was like an old hippie kind of slogan during like the, you know, late 60s, early 70s hippie days or whatever. But anyway, you know, we're really early, but this is kind of a good place to stop. I was about to get into the later part of the essay where he tackles some of the, what I think are pretty good objections to his philosophy, and what I think are pretty bad responses. I don't think his responses to the objections, at least here in this essay, are that great. I think he does a pretty good job of laying out his belief and his philosophy, but not as good defending it. And so when we get back on Thursday, I'm going to try to help him out. There's another philosopher they were friends, Simone de Beauvoir. I think I've mentioned her before. They were lifelong lovers. They had an open relationship, right? Because they want to be free and all this, you know, wild stuff. But she wrote an essay, Simone de Beauvoir. She wrote an essay a couple, 2-3 years after this speech was given, where she expands a bit, I think, on some of Sartre's defenses and does a much better job, I would say. So I'm gonna actually be kind of ripping her off. I would say ripping her off. I'll give her credit when she comes up, but I'll be mentioning her a little bit. But next class, we will probably do everything that's left for Sartre and then some. We might even have a chance to get started on Nietzsche. Don't worry too much about reading. You can go ahead, if you're done with Sartre already and you want to go ahead and get a head start on Nietzsche, I would encourage it. We won't get that far into Nietzsche. We probably will only get through like the prelude and maybe like the first 4 or 5 sections of Beyond Good and Evil. We'll just see. We'll see what happens next week. But this week is Sartre. Next week is Nietzsche. And then your paper, your final essay, will be due at the end of the week next week. I might update that. I'll give you as long as I can for the final paper, but I need to have grades in, I think, before Thanksgiving. So something like that. I mean, like I said, I'll give you as much time as I can, but Thursday I'll know for sure, and I'll start posting topics soon. I need to catch up on grading. I would have probably caught up on at least most of it this morning if I hadn't lost power in my neighborhood. Let's cross our fingers and hope that I have no more blackouts in my neighborhood, at least till the end of the semester, so I can actually get some work done. But let's go ahead. Let's call it a day. I think this is a really good place to stop. We've kind of laid down all the basics for start. Now we can get to the more critical and start winding down. But I'll go ahead and leave it open for just a minute or two in case anybody wants to chat or has something else to say or questions. Otherwise, you guys have a great day. I'll be safe, and I will see you all on Thursday, I hope.